Turning 80 is not just a number. It is a milestone of a long journey, a point where the past is no longer a fleeting memory, but becomes vivid slices of time. At that stage, people no longer count the years by wall calendars, but by how the gatherings grow fewer, how cups of tea cool more quickly, and how stories are left with no one to tell. When you cross the age of 80, you are not merely entering the final stage of life. You are stepping into its deepest part, the most contemplative, and sometimes the loneliest chapter of the human experience. This is a time when the mind remains sharp enough to understand everything clearly, yet the body and circumstances are no longer what they once were to respond accordingly. What's striking is that no one prepares you for this stage. Books on aging often stop at 65. Medical advice usually revolves around blood pressure, bone health, or nutrition. But what about silent loneliness? The feeling of being forgotten, the fear of no longer being yourself, or those nights when you wake up just to ask, I've survived this long, but for what? That is why today's video from Health Daily Tips is not here to teach you how to stay healthy, nor to paint a rosy picture of old age. We want to do just one thing to name the things no one speaks of: the real pain that so many people after 80 are silently facing, hidden behind polite smiles and the familiar response, I'm fine. These are 8 harsh truths after the age of 80, told from the perspective of the elderly themselves, and from the stories of families who have witnessed their parents slow down, grow more sorrowful, and at times fall apart. Not to frighten you, not to dramatize anything, but to help you recognize, understand, and prepare so that even as you move through the slowest years of your life, you can still hold on to the most precious thing, your agency and your dignity. And if you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, this video isn't just about your future. It is also a reminder your parents are living these stories every single day. Let us begin the first part. Together with Health Daily Tips. Part 1, when loved ones gradually drift away. There is a quiet kind of pain that no one warns you about. It doesn't strike like a sudden storm, but slowly creeps into your life, filling the tiny empty spaces of your daily routine. It begins when you start to notice that those who used to be constant in your life are no longer there. Not with noise, not with goodbyes. They just slowly disappear. Mrs. Doris, 82 years old, living in Ohio, used to be the center of every family gathering. Sunday dinners were filled with laughter, with grandchildren running through the house. But then, her daughter married and moved far away. The older grandchild started working weekends. The younger one got hooked on their phone. A week passed, then 2. No one came home for dinner anymore. At first, I thought they were just busy, she said with a wistful smile. But then I realized no one really needed me there anymore to feel like a family. So when did the people we love begin to slowly disappear from our everyday lives? After turning 80, you don't just face illness or memory decline. You face the quiet fading of relationships that once gave your life its rhythm. Lifelong friends pass away. Neighbors move out. Old reunions are postponed indefinitely. Your children and grandchildren get caught up in work, parenting, and a world so busy that you often feel like someone standing behind a glass wall, just watching. According to a national AARP survey in 2023, over 38% of Americans over 80 said they felt lonely or isolated at least once a week. Meanwhile, 52% of those living alone at this age said they no longer have anyone to talk to every day. Loneliness isn't just the absence of people. It's the absence of connection. No one asks what you think, how you feel, whether you're okay. But loneliness after 80 isn't like in your 60s or 70s. It's not just a lack of conversation, it's the loss of those who knew the journey of your life. The people who knew who you loved when you were young, what you lost in 1985, or the reason you lied to your mother in high school. When they're gone, you don't just lose a friend, you lose a part of yourself. Seniors in America often live independently, but sometimes independence also means isolation. When you don't want to bother anyone, you hesitate to call your daughter just to say the weather was nice today. When you see your son post a photo with his friends, you don't message him afraid he might see it as a nuisance. And so, distance forms, not because anyone intended it, but because time passes, and everyone thinks, maybe later. That drifting away doesn't always come from death. It comes from shifting priorities. The nightly calls become weekly ones, then only on holidays. The full dinners become takeout boxes in the fridge. Sometimes it's the hurried glance from your daughter-in-law as she hands you your medicine and rushes back to a deadline. Sometimes it's the text, "Sorry, Grandma, I'm busy," followed by days of silence. And so, you start talking to the television more than to people. You count how many times a bird taps at your window. You remember the scent of perfume worn by a friend who's now gone. Then you ask yourself, if I disappeared one day, who would notice first? But here's the thing, this loneliness is not destiny. You can write a letter to an old friend. You can join your local club again. You can call a former classmate just to say, "I miss you." Not everyone will respond. But those who do are worth it. Because after 80, connection doesn't come naturally like before. You're no longer the center of the party, but you can still be the flame that warms a cold room. And sometimes, just one glance, one gesture, one question from you might be the very reason someone else doesn't feel alone. You may not stop the current of life from pulling loved ones farther away, but you can decide not to stand still and watch everything drift into silence. Send a handwritten letter, make a surprise phone call, ask your grandchild to teach you Zoom, just so you can see their face for 5 minutes every Sunday morning. Not because you're weak, but because you still care and you're still here to love. And that very act, the choice to preserve these small connections, is proof that you're still living fully, even in the quietest of days. Part 2. The body weakens and no longer recovers like it used to. Frank was never one to sit still. Even in his 80s, he still walked every morning, tended the flowers behind his house, and changed the light bulbs in his garage himself. A lean but nimble man, few would guess he used to be a mechanic, someone who once lifted an 80-kilogram engine with his bare hands. Until one afternoon, while bending down to pick up the newspaper, he lost his balance and tumbled down the steps. It was just a mild sprain, the doctor said. But 3 months later, Frank still hadn't returned to walking normally. His legs grew weaker, his spirits sank, and the only thing he could lift each day was the same repeating question, what is happening to my body? At 80, the body is no longer the loyal companion it once was. It becomes a complicated map with warning signs flaring up at any moment. A backache. It might just be muscle strain, or it could be the first signal of irreversible joint degeneration. A headache. Maybe from lack of sleep, or maybe a sign of vestibular disorder. The frightening part isn't the pain itself, but not knowing when your body might betray you again. So when do we start realizing that we can no longer bounce back from the little things? It doesn't happen on a single fateful day, but through a series of quiet changes, waking up one morning with a stiff neck, coming home from the market with sore knees. What used to heal after a good night's sleep now lingers into the 3rd or 4th day, and gradually, you stop believing that tomorrow will be better. According to research by the National Institute on Aging, after the age of 80, the body's recovery rate from minor illnesses or injuries drops by an average of 40% compared to people in their 60s. At the same time, the immune system's natural compensatory ability also declines significantly, making a common cold potentially escalate into pneumonia if not closely monitored. What's concerning is that many elderly individuals still cling to the mindset of toughing it out, even when the body's no longer capable of pushing through on its own. But this isn't just a medical story. It's a matter of dignity. For many, accepting that they need to lie down more, that they need someone to help them down a step, that they need chairs with armrests isn't simply a matter of convenience. It's a quiet admission that self-respect doesn't want to hear, "I'm not the same anymore." And from there, self-doubt creeps into every action. You start hesitating before long trips, wondering whether you should carry a cane, debating between climbing a chair to grab the spice jar or calling someone for help. Then you decide not to, afraid of being seen as a burden. You don't want to be the frail old man, but you also know that if you fall again, you might never walk the same. So you live in the silence between "I'm fine" and "I'm afraid." This decline doesn't follow a steady pattern. Some days you feel strong enough to cook your own breakfast. Other days, just walking from the bed to the kitchen leaves you breathless. And what drains you isn't the pain itself, but the unpredictability, as if your own body is playing tricks on you. Some choose to hide it. They don't tell their children they felt dizzy in the bathroom. They push themselves to go buy medicine even when the distance is too much, because perhaps the fear of being a burden is greater than the fear of pain itself. Yet, It's in this very stage of life that a shift in mindset is needed. Slowing down doesn't mean giving up. Accepting limitations isn't surrender. It's a way of protecting what remains with respect and care for yourself. Imagine your body as an old tree. It may no longer stretch its branches as it once did, but its roots run deep, anchoring memories, experience, and a depth of living that no one else possesses. If that tree wants to endure many more seasons, it needs to be watered, sheltered from the wind, and supported by the trees beside it. This age isn't a time to prove you're still as strong as before. It's the moment to begin living with a gentler spirit, gentler toward your own body. When you slow down, it's not because you're defeated, but because you're listening. When you ask for help, it's not a sign of weakness, but proof of courage. The courage to protect what's still precious within you. Don't force yourself to move faster if your heart is asking to rest. Don't hesitate to place your hand on the chair for balance if it keeps you from falling again. Some days, you don't need to go anywhere. It's enough just to rise each morning, take a deep breath, and tell yourself, I'm still here, and I'm still going on. Part 3, silently forgotten by society. There is a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from losing someone. It comes from the moment you realize you are still here, but no one seems to see you anymore. Mrs. Helen, 86 years old, was a geography teacher who taught for 35 years at a suburban high school in Pennsylvania. When I met her at a community seminar, she shared that the week before, while visiting a museum with her grandson, she tried to answer a question the tour guide had just asked, but he kept speaking as if she had never opened her mouth. I stayed quiet after that, she said with a soft smile, though her eyes held a deep sadness, because it seems like they don't expect me to speak anymore. At this age, you start to realize you're slowly being pushed to the margins of conversation, of decisions, of society itself, not because you have nothing to say, but because others no longer see you as someone worth listening to. Store clerks look over your shoulder to serve the next customer. Doctors talk to your son instead of asking where you're feeling pain. Television is full of young faces and products for people in their 20s, and you become a footnote, something that could be there or not, and no one would notice. So when does that silence begin to take shape? Not in a single day. It starts quietly, the moment no one asks your opinion on dinner. When the wedding invitation is addressed to your children, but leaves off the line for the grandparents. When people's eyes start looking through you, as if you're part of the background, no longer the main character in any story. According to a Pew Research Center survey, over 60% of Americans over 80 say they feel that society no longer values the voices of older adults. This doesn't just affect mood, it significantly lowers quality of life, sense of autonomy, and personal dignity. But what hurts most is this forgetting is not always intentional. Grandchildren are busy, medical staff are rushed, society runs at full speed, and few have time to pause and ask what those who have lived 7 or 8 decades are thinking, needing, or feeling. In a world that worships productivity and novelty, the elderly are often seen as having completed their mission. They were once workers, teachers, doctors, firefighters, mothers of 3, fathers who sacrificed a lifetime. Now they are labeled as needing assistance, old, or less sharp. These words don't just lower social value, they chip away at a person's identity. You begin to hold back your opinions, afraid of being seen as outdated. You give less advice, thinking they don't want to hear it anyway. Eventually, you stop speaking not because you have nothing left to say, but because no one seems to want to listen. Yet your presence still holds profound value, even if you sometimes forget it yourself. You are a witness to a time no history book can truly capture. You know what it means to live through an era without the internet, without cell phones, only handwritten letters and genuine eye contact. And because of that, you carry a kind of wisdom and calm that younger generations are losing. Don't let the silence shrink you. Let it be the space where you recharge, then step out and remind the world that you are still here. Tell a story no one asked to hear. Raise your hand at the community meeting. Write a complaint about poor service at the pharmacy, not to change the world, but because you deserve to be acknowledged, even if only in that one moment. And if today, when you passed by the mirror, you no longer recognize the person you were at 50, remember what defines you isn't your face, but the depth of what you've lived. The world may forget you at times, but never forget who you are. And every time you speak up, You don't just reclaim your place in life. You inspire a new generation to value what is lasting and what has long been overlooked. Part 4. Losing direction when your role disappears. Bill used to be the person everyone turned to for advice. He was a former manager at a steel plant in Chicago, the head of a team of nearly 200 workers for 25 years. He made quick decisions, handled situations firmly, and never let things slip out of control. And yet now, at 83, as he sits alone on a wooden chair on his front porch, he asks himself, do I still matter? That question doesn't come from his physical state. He's still healthy, still mobile. But inside, a part of him feels like it has gone dormant. No one asks him to fix their car anymore. No one needs his work advice, and sometimes he doesn't even know why he should bother getting up early. This sense of lost direction at this age doesn't come from being lost on the map. It comes from not knowing where you stand in the larger picture of life. So when do we start to feel like we no longer have a role? Maybe it's the day your son moves out and you no longer need to make the bed or prepare dinner for anyone. Maybe it's the first time you walk into the living room and no one is waiting to hear your stories. Or maybe it's just that one morning the calendar is empty, no alarm is needed, and no one expects anything from you. You used to be a father, a mother, a provider, someone who never stopped working. You were the best cook in the house, the one who solved family disputes, the one who made holidays warm and joyful. Then gradually, those roles shifted away, quietly, without warning. Older adults don't just ache from sore joints. They ache from not being called by the names they once were. Dad, I need your opinion. Mom, can you help me make this dish? Grandpa, tell us the rest of that story. Those phrases are heard less and less, and they leave behind a space larger than any room. Many elderly individuals face mild depression or a sense of meaninglessness simply because they no longer feel valuable in the eyes of their loved ones. According to a report from the CDC, as many as 27% of people over 80 in the U.S. experience symptoms of depression. And the cause isn't just illness. It's also the loss of social and family roles. You may still be healthy, still clear-headed, but when no one asks for your advice, when no one needs your help, when no one gives you a specific task, you begin to wonder, what am I still here for? What's painful is that many older adults remove themselves. They don't want to get in the way of their children or grandchildren. They withdraw, thinking they've got their own lives now. And yes, that's true. But withdrawal should not mean disappearing. Roles are not job titles. They are the feeling that you are still needed, that you still have something to offer, even the smallest things. There is an elderly woman in Wisconsin named Margaret. She's no longer strong enough to cook for the whole family like she once did. But she still writes handwritten birthday cards to each grandchild, even though none of them write back anymore. When asked why she keeps writing, she smiled and said, "Because I want them to know. I still remember the day they were born, and I'm still the one who keeps track of everyone's birthdays." That is a role. And sometimes, roles don't have to be big, they just need to be genuine. Remember, if you were once someone who guided others, you can also guide yourself. If you once taught others how to live, you can teach yourself how to live again, even if it means living slower, living deeper. No one defines your worth but you. Even if your old roles fade away, you can still choose a new one. A listener, a storyteller, a keeper of family memories, or simply someone who smiles at themselves each morning. Because the most beautiful thing at this age is not how much you can still do, but what you still choose to do, and whether you do it with your whole heart. Part 5. Memory loss and the erosion of personal identity. There is a kind of loss that leaves no blood or tears. It doesn't come with screams of pain, nor does it require bandages or anti-inflammatories, but it lingers, seeps in, and breaks a person from the inside. It's when you begin to forget, not forgetting your keys or leaving the lights on, but forgetting a familiar name, forgetting why you just walked into a room, forgetting how to make a cup of coffee you've prepared flawlessly for 40 years. Eleanor, 84 years old, was once a librarian in a small town in Oregon. She remembered every Dewey Decimal Code, knew who liked war novels and who borrowed cookbooks. But now, she has to write her granddaughter's name on a sticky note on the fridge because once, when the girl came over, she called her by the name of her high school friend. The scariest part isn't not recognizing others. She said one day, it's the moment you no longer recognize yourself. So when does memory begin to quietly slip away? It doesn't come like a storm. It arrives like morning fog. You can still see the road, just not clearly. At first, it's little things, like searching for your glasses while wearing them, forgetting someone's birthday, then things that used to be second nature, like how to run the washing machine, or how to make your favorite soup suddenly feel unfamiliar. Memory loss at this age isn't just a medical symptom. It becomes a crisis of identity, because you're not just forgetting facts, you're forgetting who you used to be. According to the Alzheimer's Association, 1 in 9 Americans over the age of 65 is living with some form of dementia. But the truth is, the fear of memory loss affects far more people than that. Many older adults never receive an Alzheimer's diagnosis, yet they live in quiet anxiety each time a memory slips through their fingers. You might forget the lullaby you once sang to your grandchild. Forget the face of a best friend who has passed away. And more painfully, you might look in the mirror and see a familiar face, unsure of when it belonged to you. They often say memory makes us who we are. So if memory fades, who do we become? At this age, you begin living between two worlds of the real one, with children, friends, doctors, and daily life. And the one in your mind, where past, present, imagination, and forgetfulness blur together like a slow rewinding film. There are days when you remember everything clearly, as if nothing has changed. But there are also days when you struggle to find words, when you forget the story you were just telling. And in the moment, someone else looks at you with worry. You suddenly feel very small. But the truth is, memory loss doesn't take away your value unless you allow it to take your dignity. You may forget a name, but still remember a feeling. You may forget an old street, but still recall why you once walked down it. There's an elderly man in Colorado named Raymond, who kept a daily journal for more than 20 years. After his memory began to fade, he could no longer recall everything he had written. But he still wrote, not to remember, but to hold on to the feeling that he was still himself. And sometimes, when he read back a line from the past, he would laugh and say, "Oh, so that's what I used to think," as if discovering an old friend within himself. The truth is, you may lose parts of your memory, but no one can take away your depth. What makes you unique isn't what you remember, but what you've lived and passed on. And even if your mind begins to drift like a quiet boat across a lake, your heart still remains anchored in love, in a look, in the grip of a hand. Because sometimes, you don't need to remember who someone is to hold them with everything you are. Part 6. Family fractures that may never heal. At a certain stage of life, people stop hoping for grand things. Success, recognition, and big victories no longer matter. Instead, what's longed for is a simple phone call from a child who hasn't checked in for a while. A hug from a grandchild who once clung to you, now only sending a brief text. An apology, or simply the chance to say, "I'm not angry with you anymore." But sometimes, those seemingly simple things never come. Mr. Richard, 87 years old, lives alone in the suburbs of Texas. He has 3 children. The eldest, who was upset that he didn't support her divorce, hasn't come home in 10 years. The second sends cards during holidays, but doesn't call. The youngest lives in another state and always says, "I'm really busy. Please understand." When a nurse once asked if he wanted to call someone, he shook his head. "What for?" he said. "If the person on the other end doesn't want to listen." Family rifts often don't come from big explosions. They begin with small cracks, a harsh word said in anger, a forgotten birthday, a phone call missed at the wrong time. Slowly, distance forms, and eventually, no one knows where to start to put the pieces back together. At this age, you don't have a lifetime to wait for the right moment. Yet paradoxically, older people often stay silent. They don't want to be a bother. They don't want to stir up painful memories. You may not say anything, but you remember. You remember the last time your daughter called you mom, the hug from your grandson on his graduation day, even the sharp words that hurt, but most of all, you remember that there was no time left to forgive, and no chance to be forgiven. According to the Institute for Family Studies, 1 in 4 Americans over 70 report that they've lost contact with at least one close family member for more than 5 years. Many of these cases weren't caused by major conflict, but simply because neither side knew how to step back toward each other. You were once the one who taught your kids how to walk, who cooked dinner for the family every night, Now you're the one waiting for them to visit something that used to be a given, now feels like a luxury. And when they don't come, you tell yourself, they're just busy while your heart breaks a little more each time. Worse still, sometimes you're not even sure, did I do something wrong? You replay those strict years. The words you thought were lessons, now perhaps they became walls. You want to apologize, but you're afraid it'll look like weakness. You want to say, I miss you, but fear you'll be met with coldness. So you stay silent, and the distance grows. But the truth is, no one is perfect and no family is perfect. We've all hurt others, and we've all been hurt. But at this age, you understand better than anyone that silence never heals anything. Some fractures may never fully close, but some distances can be bridged with just one phone call, one handwritten note, one honest sentence that says, I still love you, whether you come or not. And even if they don't answer in time, you can still forgive, not for them to see, but so that your own heart can breathe easier. At this stage of life, what you need most is not to be right, but to be at peace, not to win old arguments, but to find quiet in each breath before the day ends. If you're carrying inside you a conversation that was never begun, be brave enough to open it. If the one you loved is no longer here, write them a letter. You don't have to send it, just write it. Because what's left unsaid can weigh more than any spoken blame. And if no one else is willing to take the first step, let that person be you. Because when you've lived this many years, there's nothing left to prove except that love still lives within you. Part 7. The financial burden and the fear of losing security. No one ever says that the biggest worry after 80 might not be illness, but the electric bill, not the aching knee in the morning, but the chill that runs through you when you open a hospital invoice. Not the question of how much longer you'll live, but whether you can afford to keep living at all. Mrs. Lorraine, 82-year-old, lives on Social Security in Florida. Her husband passed away early, and her 2 children live far away, sending just a few $100s each month. She once had a small savings account, but after 2 hospital stays in a single year, the number in that account dropped to 3 digits. When I asked if she needed help buying a blood pressure monitor, she smiled softly and said, I need money for food first. At this age, you don't spend on much. No new handbags, no restaurants, no movie tickets. But the basic costs, medication, checkups, support equipment, electricity, transportation keep rising. And the saddest part is, when your body needs care the most, your wallet grows thinner. According to a report by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, nearly 30% of Americans over 80 spend more than 20% of their income on medical expenses. Meanwhile, many rely solely on Social Security benefits, averaging less than $1,700 a month, a figure that doesn't stretch far when the prices of medicine, housing, and daily living continue to rise. But financial stress in old age isn't just about numbers. It's a quiet kind of anxiety, a creeping fear of becoming a burden. You hesitate when your grandchildren invite you out for lunch. You refuse to buy a new cane because the old one still works. You delay seeing a doctor because every visit means a new charge, and you're afraid they'll find something else wrong, triggering a chain of bills. Some elderly people silently endure skipping milk, cutting back on pills, eating less just to avoid bothering anyone. But in truth, they are sacrificing their safety and dignity just to survive in silence. You were once someone who worked hard for decades, maybe as a postal worker, a truck driver, a teacher, a doctor, a cashier. You paid taxes, raised children, paid off debt. But now, you're counting every dollar. And the question, can I afford to live one more year, is no longer hypothetical. It's real pressure. What breaks people at this age isn't just lack of money, but the feeling that they no longer control their own life. You want to replace the old mattress that hurts your back, but you can't. You want to see a specialist, but your insurance won't cover it. You want to travel one last time, but you can't even cover the train fare. In a civilized society, no one should have to live in fear of poverty at the end of life. Yet in reality, many seniors are forced to choose between survival and self-respect, between medication and meals, between care and independence. And the bitter truth is, financial stress makes you shrink your world. You turn down invitations, refuse help, give up little joys just because you're afraid of the cost. But you must remember, your worth is not measured by your bank account, not because you can still pay, but because you are still here. And that alone means you deserve to live with dignity. If you are struggling, don't be afraid to speak up. There are communities, programs, organizations willing to help. But they won't know unless you tell them. Look to local senior centers, community groups, churches, or simply ask a trusted neighbor. And if you are the loved one of someone in this stage of life, don't wait for them to ask. Be the one who checks in, who says, "Do you have enough medication? Would you like help scheduling a doctor's visit? Do you need a warmer coat?" Because sometimes, just one question is enough to make someone feel less alone in this quiet battle with numbers. At this age, what matters most isn't wealth, but the assurance that you haven't been forgotten. And you, even if you don't have much, still deserve to live as a full human being, with the right to choose, the right to feel secure, and the right to be loved. Part 8. The loss of autonomy. When you're young, you make hundreds of decisions each day: what to eat, what to wear, where to go, who to spend time with, what to do with your life. These choices weren't always the right ones, but they gave you the feeling of being yourself. Because being able to choose is a form of freedom, and freedom is one of the most sacred things a person can have. But then, at this age, you begin to feel like your choices are being made for you. The doctor speaks with your son about your treatment plan. Instead of looking you in the eye, caregivers decide your mealtime, your bedtime, your bath schedule, as if you no longer have the right to say, "This is how I'd like it." A family meeting is held, and you are simply informed of the outcome that you'll be moving into a nursing home next week. Mrs. Irene, 85-year-old, said what hurt the most wasn't leaving the house she had lived in for nearly 40 years, but the fact that no one asked if she wanted to leave. They said it was for my own good, she explained. But if something is good, and I'm not part of the decision, is it really good? At this age, the loss of autonomy doesn't always come from cruelty. Children worry and want to keep you safe. Medical staff follow protocols. Family members fear you'll hurt yourself. But the more people worry on your behalf, the more you begin to feel like you're no longer in charge of your own life. According to a survey by the National Council on Aging, nearly 45% of Americans over 80 say they feel that decisions about their health, finances, or living arrangements are made for them. They are left out of conversations not because they're incapable, but because others assume they are fragile. And over time, you begin to doubt yourself too. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not clear-headed enough to choose. But deep down, you know you are still yourself. You may have slowed down, but you haven't lost your mind. Your hands may tremble, but your heart still knows what it wants. And you understand that when others take away your right to choose, they also take away a piece of your dignity. Losing autonomy isn't just about who signs the paperwork or who books the appointment. It's about whether you're still allowed to say no, to say this is what I like, to say I disagree without being seen as difficult, stubborn, or senile. There's an old man in California named Samuel. He lives in a nursing home but insists on choosing his own clothes every morning, even if it takes him 30 minutes. When a caregiver offered to help him dress faster, he refused, then said quietly, "This is the last thing I can still do for myself. If I lose this, I'll have nothing left." That statement sounds sad, but in truth, it's a reminder. No matter the stage of life, people need to be heard, respected, and given the right to choose. So if you are living at this age and feel that others are making too many decisions on your behalf, remember you have the right to speak. You have the right to ask why, to say I'm not ready for that, and to make your own choices, even if that choice is to sit quietly for 5 more minutes in your favorite old chair. And if you are a caregiver, a relative, or someone who loves a person over 80, don't take away their final say. Ask, wait, let them choose. Even if it's something small, because when you allow someone to choose, you're not just giving them back their freedom. You're preserving their dignity, and sometimes that matters even more than protection. Final thought: when aging isn't only about what's lost, reaching your 80s is often described as a milestone and honor, a rare journey. But few talk about what quietly comes along with that honor: the loss of loved ones, the loss of health, the loss of roles, the loss of your own voice in the story of your life. Not everyone says it out loud, but anyone who has lived this long knows aging isn't just about slowing down. It's about learning to live with the empty spaces no one ever taught you how to fill. You were once the strong one, the pillar for others, the living memory of an entire family. And then, bit by bit, you find yourself stepping back, being called old, being treated as if your part is over. But you know better than anyone. No one else gets to write the final chapter of your life. So if there's anything that remains after all these chapters, it's this simple truth: you are still here. And your presence, in every breath, every wrinkle, every story yet to be told, still holds immense value. Maybe you can no longer run fast, but you can still pause and admire a single flower for a long time. Maybe you can't recall exact dates, but you still remember how it feels when someone holds your hand tightly. Maybe you no longer decide everything, but you still have the power to choose how you live each remaining day, with kindness, with stillness, with a love that needs no approval. Old age doesn't have to be the ending. It can be the deepest, quietest, yet most beautiful part of a human life. Because at this point, you are no longer weighed down by anything but yourself, and perhaps that is when your truest voice finally speaks. So even if today you feel tired, forgotten, or uncertain about your place in the world, remember this: you are not alone. What you share, what you think, what you hold quietly in your heart, someone still wants to hear, still longs to understand, and still hopes to walk beside you. If you've made it this far in reading, or if these words are reaching you through a voice, please consider leaving behind a story about yourself, about a parent, or about someone you love who has lived or is living through the quiet years of aging. Because somewhere in your story, someone else may feel seen, understood, and brought back to life again.